All right. Social studies time. We're going to blow through a pretty quick review of what we've been learning so that it's fresh in our mind, especially since we have to get back into our groups and keep working on our hexagonal thinking mats before we move into starting our planning of our green screen project. I know that we talk a whole lot about England, right? And we talked about this last time and the previous time before that. And the big reason why is we have a lot of historical ties to England, especially since we fought the Revolutionary War against England. Although France and Spain, as you can see by this chart, obviously had some influence in the Americas before they were actually America back in the day, right? And this came about as some important things because if England's here and they're trying to expand out this way, they're going to start bumping into France at some point, right? And encroaching on France's land. Well, we all know that England, if they want something, well, what do? They just kind of take it, right? That's their thing, back then at least. And in roughly around in this area somewhere, there were some rivers that France had access to because it is land that they had claimed, although it wasn't theirs. But they claimed it anyway, right? And England said, well, we want that. So then not only were they taking it from the French, they were taking it from the Native Americans as well. And so we ended up having some confrontations. Who remembers what that fight between England and France was called, Glenn? French and Indian War, even though it wasn't fought between the French and the Indians. Honestly, France had more Native Americans on their side than England did. And kind of understandably so. France would just kind of show up and take some stuff and then leave. They didn't really have a whole lot of colonies there. England at the time was not only like taking the land and the resources, they stayed there. So the Native Americans had a little bit more of a hostile relationship with them than they did with France. And so again, all of this is what's leading up to the Boston Tea Party. We just talked about the French and Indian War a little bit. We all know that who won the French and Indian War? It was between England and France. Jesse, who won? England won. And when England won, they won all of France's land. Now, one thing that we learned about, again, they're getting all this land, all this access to rivers, lakes, and streams. One thing we learned about wars is they're not very cheap, are they? Wars cost tons of money. And some people in England, they wanted to win that war so bad that they started borrowing money from everybody, and they went super in debt. They needed to be able to replenish their money that they had lost in the war. Even though with the Treaty of Paris, they got all of France's land, it would have taken a long time to recoup all that money back from the land they got from France. Even though it opened up multiple trade routes, they needed the money like now, not 10 or 20 years from now. So what did they decide to do to the colonists in order to get that money back? Brandon, taxes. Now, on the surface, that sounds kind of like a reasonable thing, right? Hey, we just fought a war, we protected you from France, and we would like to recoup some of that money. Can you give us some money in taxes? And on the surface, that sounds reasonable, doesn't it? But then when we start to kind of hear the colonist objection to it, we kind of understand why the colonists weren't very happy with that, because the Stamp Act comes out, they're taxing anything that's on paper. And remember, there wasn't a whole lot of digital stuff back then. Matter of fact, there was no digital stuff back then. It was all on paper. And so that was rather expensive for people. If you had a deed, a birth certificate, anything like that, it all had to be on this taxed paper. And the colonists said, well, wait a minute, listen, like we have 0 people in the parliament representing us. So when you're making all these laws, we don't have anybody to argue for us in parliament. We need somebody in parliament. Otherwise, no taxation without representation, right? And the colonists were pretty serious about that. And England was like, no, like you're paying the tax. And the colonists were like, no, we got some multiple things we're going to do. Number one, we'll protest. If it has your little stamp on the paper, we're going to burn it. Matter of fact, we're going to boycott buying any of your paper. The only time I'm going to buy your paper is if someone stole it and smuggles it in and sells it to me cheaper. So we're already starting to see England and the colonists starting to bump heads again, right? And so we went through the Stamp Act, and we know that the colonists got together and they said, we're going to have this Congress, this Stamp Act Congress that gets together, and we're going to unify the 13 colonies in our boycott and our protest of this, because if we can get all 13 colonies together, I think that's going to be a larger voice than just some random protests here and there. And so the Stamp Act Congress met, and they gave this unified protest and papers to England, and it actually worked. England eventually got rid of the Stamp Act, but some people went a little nuts, right? Remember the Sons of Liberty? Yeah, I mean, they tarred and feathered people, they beat people up, they threatened people's families, and then probably the worst thing of all, remember they were painting people's houses with poop. That's nasty, right? You can punch me in the eye. Start painting my house with poop, we're going to have a problem, right? Like, I'm calling some of my friends with guns to come over at that point. Ooh. Right? I'm calling some soldiers in. Like, you're getting out of hand. And so you can see that this tension is starting to build up more and more and more. So the Sons of Liberty certainly didn't help anything. And so I kind of enjoy this. It's probably I think this is my favorite part of the whole story. Even more than the Boston Tea Party is England said, sure thing, no problem. The Stamp Act is gone. We'll get rid of that. And then the same day they said, we're going to get this Declaratory Act. And what we're going to do is we've now, with this act, it basically says we can make any laws and we can make any taxes that we want to. So now that that's a law, we can do whatever we want to. I think that's pretty funny and very petty, and I love it. I'm there for all of that. So then this Townshend guy, Charles Townshend, he comes up with this series of laws and this series of taxes. There were taxes on paper, which was what they just got mad about, right? I mean, I'm really digging this level of pettiness. I don't know if y'all are. I just think it's very funny. As someone who has argued with his brothers and been very petty with them as they have been, just as much with me, I love this, right? This is great. And so, hey, you got mad because I woke you up playing basketball one night, so you decided to deflate my basketball. All right, well, that's all well and good. Just so you know, you ain't going to make it to school tomorrow in your car because I deflated your tires. True story. That happened at my house. And so they taxed paper, paint, lead, glass, and probably the one that made people the most angry was like sugar and tea. And because this was their jam. The colonists loved tea. Like, they had tea for breakfast, they had tea time in the afternoons, they drank tea at lunch, they drank tea at dinner. They drank tea all the time. Y'all think we drink sweet tea like crazy. Nothing compared to what they were doing. And this was it. Like, they also had this thing that said if we catch anybody smuggling, because people were smuggling in illegal goods, like, we're going to kill them. And if I even suspect that Hayden has something in one of her businesses or her house, I can just walk in with a soldier whenever I want to and search everything. And if I don't like her, then I just plant some stuff in there that's not supposed to be there. Be like, oh, look what I found. And then she gets in big, huge trouble and maybe like executed, or she gets kicked out of the colony or something. So we're starting to see like heads are really starting to bump even more so now, right? It's getting pretty intense. So why did the British make these laws? They really wanted the colonies to start paying for themselves, which is not an outlandish thing to say, right? Hey guys, y'all been there a while now. Like, I really feel like you should kind of be footing some of the bill. Like, we shouldn't be sending you money constantly. You definitely should be kind of paying your way for some things now. And these Townshend Acts were also ways that the colonies would pay the people, the governors and the people that ran the businesses. It was a way to pay them also. And again, the British are thinking they certainly can't be upset with these taxes because you can't run a colony, you can't have a government without some kind of money being involved. I know you enjoy living here with your religious freedoms and you can kind of pick the job that you want. Certainly you wouldn't mind paying a little bit of money to do that. But again, they were wrong because the colonists, again, are starting to protest the taxes, which is really not a shock to anybody if you've been listening to this story at all so far, right? Townshend Acts, not very popular. So this was important because this pushed the American colonists really close to that revolution point. Like, they were at the breaking point. And it also showed that while the British were saying, I don't understand why you won't pay the taxes, the colonists were also saying, we don't understand how you don't understand that with taxation without representation is just not fair. Now, can't you see where these two probably could have sat down and said, okay, I will pay the taxes if I have representation. And the other side says, you'll pay taxes if we give you representation. Why, that sounds like a wondrous idea. How about you get some people from the colonies and the parliament, we get our money, you get your representation, and everybody's happy. What a novel idea, right? I mean, heaven forbid you actually get together and have a conversation and get along and work out your differences and have a compromise. But obviously that didn't happen. The colonists were not allowed any representatives in Parliament. So the Britons said, no. Okay then, I'm not paying your taxes. And I'm going to keep doing illegal things and buying from other countries. So you can start to see, they're really starting to get very, very angry at each other. So again, the colonists were really angry about not having representation. The British are very angry that they're not paying their taxes. People are just getting madder and madder without actually talking about what's going on. And nobody's bending on either side and saying, well, I can understand your point of view. The colonies did not like the Townshend Acts. They didn't like the Stamp Act. They didn't like the Sugar Act. They didn't like any of the acts. And so this thing called the Boston Massacre occurred. And it happened on the evening of March 5th, 1770. So it started out with some colonists. They were doing their protesting, right? We've seen the videos that my kids made with their signs and people yelling and screaming. I'm sure there were some words being hurled back and forth and some insults, and people were getting roasted. And as the argument began to grow, and this is where I think the colonists are actually kind of dumb. You've got dudes over here on the other side, like soldiers with guns. So you decide in your protesting that it would be wise to start throwing sticks and snowballs at them. That sounds super wise, right? Hey, I see you have a gun. I shall throw a stick at ye. That's you're asking for it at that point, right? Because somebody's going to get mad.
So we're going to get shot.
Exactly. Soon there was 50 people. And so Captain Thomas Preston, he sent more soldiers to the custom house to maintain order. Listen, don't let them paint this house with poop. Tell them to stop throwing sticks and stones and snowballs at people. And so here come these guys with guns, more soldiers. And the colonists thought, oh, wait a minute. You're not going to intimidate me. I dare you to shoot me.
Oh, you're just
What?
acting for it.
What? So again, look. I dare you. Matter of fact, at this time of the season, they might have said, I double dog dare you to shoot me, right? And the little kid said, well, you can't double dog dare me. It's rules now. I kind of have to shoot you. If you double dog dare me, you're going to get shot, right? So guess what happened?
They get shot.
Captain Preston got there. He tried to calm everybody down. Somebody threw something. Some people say it was a rock inside of a snowball. I don't know what was thrown. I don't think there's any definitive answer. Something was thrown, really angered one of the soldiers and knocked him down. So he shot into the crowd of people. A few seconds later, everything's kind of quiet. People are like, holy cow, he just shot. But you said you dared him. I know I dared him, but I can't believe he actually shot at me. And so then all of a sudden, lots of soldiers opened fire. 3 colonists died immediately. 2 others that got shot died a little bit later from their wounds of getting shot. Do you think that went over very well? No, it did not go over very well. We'll watch this together. If you're at home, I'll put a Nearpod code in. You can watch this at home. The crowd left. 13 people arrested, 8 soldiers, 1 officer, 4 civilians. They were charged with murder and put in jail. The British troops were removed from the city as well. Not a lot of happy going on. So, what ended up happening was the Boston Tea Party. And so they staged a protest. They dressed up in some different things. They stormed one of the boats there, and they threw 342 chests of tea into the water. I forget how much money that was back then, but that's like throwing a whole lot of money into the water and just flushing it down the toilet. Again, some of them were disguised as Native Americans, but the costumes didn't fool anybody because they were